When you want to build a component in Component Builder, you need to come prepared. There's a number of things that you need to know. You need to know what you want to build. You need to know the database structures that you want to set up. These are mostly things that you will only know if you have a good understanding of a table and a database and how you would like to have it mapped. Now, if you do not know that, I could give you some pointers on some of the things that would be needed, and at the same time try to explain why you need to know these things. Okay, so we are using Sermon Distributor, which is a component that I've developed for distributing sermons. We're using that as our demo component that we are demonstrating and how to build. So you need to know what you're going to call it. So we called it Sermon Distributor. Then you would need to know the backend views that you need to build. Now the backend views in Joomla must be tightly connected to a database, and possibly in such a way that it makes sense, that the database naming conventions and everything follows suit. I am not going to be able to do an extensive explanation on all this, but just by illustrating what is the best convention of implementation. Obviously Component Builder would allow you to break these conventions, but later you would regret doing so and possibly have to redo a lot of things. The purpose being that a lot of these conventions, they add up to implementation in other areas like your custom field types and so forth, which we will get to in a moment. Well, not a moment, a few videos from now. Okay, so we first knew that when we were going to build Sermon Distributor, that these four backend views needed to be set up because we wanted these features inside of our component. And that is, the sermons had a list view of sermons and as well an editing view of a sermon, and they shared a common database table. And so we had preachers as well as series lists and series and statistics and statistic, and they all share, and as you can see, they actually represent two views but one database table. That means two views, a list view and an edit view, and you will hear me repeat these concepts over and over. And if I get confused, oh, please forgive me, it's just so much repetition that you need to understand that when I talk about views, plural, I'm always talking about the list view. If I talk about view, singular, I'm always talking about the editable view, which is basically in relation to the backend connection of the database itself. So your backend usually forms the connection to the database. Your frontend is much more dynamic, and that's why we also have a dynamic get concept which links to site views, which is the front of your component. These things will take quite a lot of explanation. If you're new to coding and PHP and all that, and JavaScript, CSS, you'll possibly get lost. But if you're not, you'll be very happy in the way we've implemented, because it leaves you with a lot of dynamics and maneuverability, which is obviously partly why I developed this component, because all the other component builders out there felt like a cookie cutter. You can really only crank out components that are sort of common to each other, and I wanted to build something that's really dynamic. So partly for that, the site views and the custom backend views are mostly the same kind of implementation, both drawing their data from the dynamic get feature in Component Builder. So you can think of these three as working as a team, but the backend views stand as the database for these. So you need to set up these first and add to them all the necessary fields, which will then map the database columns, which you can then through the dynamic get connect to, so that you can formulate a data model which can be reused in your custom backend and in your site views. So I don't know, does that explain it to you? Let me try again, just to make sure I have everybody on the same page. Your backend views are very tightly connected to database structures. So even if you were to look at component builder itself, you have what is called components, and if you were to open one, it has fields in it. And if you were to go to the database and also open component builder component, the same table, and you were to click on structure, you would see that the fields that we are seeing here, here, name, code name, version updates, bugs, short description, copyright, all these names are actually mapping directly into the database. Add license, there is name, it's obviously alphabetical, name, code name, number, images, license, email, CSS, copyright. You see, it really directly maps to the database, and it is in a way just editing the database through this view. So when it comes to the components, your backend views are all being limited to this kind of structure. And this is not a limitation on component builders' behalf, really. It's really the way Joomla wants you to implement it. By doing it this way, your classes, your models, your controllers, and everything else just behaves right because of that implementation. Now, I know some might feel that that is a major limitation, but that is the Joomla API's implementation. And if you want to go beyond that kind of infrastructure, you might probably need to look at another way than using component builder, because we only implemented it that way, so that your backend views directly maps to the database. But because we know that from time to time there is backend views that do not have even their own database, but rather takes these already saved information in the database, either from other third-party components or even your own component, because we know that you would like to take that information and remodel it maybe into a spreadsheet or into a table, a chart, or any other kind of way. We added this custom backend views which behaves on the same dynamics as the site views, which means we're trying to give you best of both worlds. First being that strong, tightly typed, well, that's not the right word, but tightly managed maybe data sets, which relates directly to the view and the list view and so forth. But at the same time, the option of adding a custom backend view which can be dynamic, and you can really do custom scripting in it. You do not need to be concerned about all the other overheads as you would usually be. So you first need to know your backend views, and then any possible custom views that maybe combines backend views. So we could possibly in the future, we haven't done so yet, possibly take statistics and sermons and preachers and series, because these statistics are taking only the downloads, whereas preachers has in them a field called hits, and so does sermons have a field called hits. That's just when someone opens one without downloading it necessarily. So does series, but statistics only counts the downloads of sermons. So we could possibly add an extra backend view, custom backend view called um, analysis or anything in this. And then in analysis, we can use the dynamic get option to get data from all the three rows tables, these tables, basically from that one and preacher table and the series table. Let's shorten it a little by removing that. And statistics, and then from them do what we would call modeling. Modeling the data, and possibly end up with a whole new data structure which we can then place into a table or into a chart in that view, which means that it is now dynamic and no longer directly connected to the database as these above views are, and it won't really have an edit view. It will be a single view just displaying those analysis data from those multiple backend database tables. And this can also be done on the front of the site. So that means this whole get feature, we could take it and put it under get, and we can give it a name, and we can call it, it is the analysis get analysis. We could call it that. And then the analysis view basically use the get analysis to get the data, and then takes that data and models it into displays it on a page. And the same can be done to the front. So the same dynamic get can be used in the front again. So that's sort of how Component Builder works if you're not looking at the fields itself. The fields is a discussion on its own, but this, which I've now sort of just typed out here, very basic and elementary, is really what you need to know before coming to Component Builder. You need to know what you want to achieve, what do you want to build, and if possible, map the fields under each of these. So in sermons we will have name, and we will have preacher, right? And we'll have series, and we will have files, right? So those would be under the sermons, and under preacher we will have also name, and we will have maybe email and description and website, and what else? Oh, maybe icon. We could also have icon here. Same goes for series. We will add a name, and I think that will be a description, of course. And by statistics, since we're only counting downloads, we will have a file name, and we will have a counter, and we will have a sermon, which is the ID, sermon ID, but we just leave it as sermon for now. And I think that will be it. So that means if you can somehow map these things beforehand, it will help you tremendously. The reason being that if you start in Component Builder, you can start by creating a new component, and you can add name and all this information. But then you'd get to, obviously you would skip most of these for initially, just getting started. You'll just set up these fields that are compulsory, the ones with the stars, and this component image, it tells you here the dimensions, right? 300 by 300 pixels, and you must put it in the image folder, and then you can access it from here. Let me see. This version updates is a nice feature which we'll really look into detail later. So you would add all these compulsory fields. At settings, you would hardly do anything at this stage. Scripts as well, you just leave blank. README also blank. Then add views. After you've saved the component once, I mean that means you've now added the name and you've added these and you've clicked save. Then you would basically be able to start adding views to it. Now, the way to add a view to a component is different from the way to create a view. You're adding the view through the settings tab, but you can create new views through this area. And you can also see already connected views, and I'll explain this again, so maybe this is going to be the duplication. What I really primarily wanted to show you is that if you start building a component, you would feel very lost if you do not know where you're going, and this will help you know where you're going. It will help you know that you need to set up these views and you need to add these fields to those views, and that kind of information and knowing how to construct this is something that you need to know beforehand. Now obviously you can always add more fields, and you can obviously add more views. It's not that you need to be that thorough and be that sure that you didn't miss something. It's more that you just need to know what you want to do. Component Builder cannot decide that for you. And you need to realize that you literally have to create all of these fields before you can add them to a view. And this line are seen as a view, although it, when it's compiled, will represent two views. It is in Component Builder's component backend views, it's seen as one view. And these fields will need to be created before they can be added to this view, and the same goes with these. The nice thing though is the name field, you can create it once and reuse it 3 times. So you can reuse the name field. You can also reuse the hits. Well, sorry, the hits are already added by default, so you don't need to add a hits field. We will be talking about the default fields later, and showing you which fields you don't need to add yourself, but it's add dynamically to each backend view, this being a backend view. Now this is also a backend view, but I would always mention that it is a custom backend view, the purpose being that it doesn't directly relate to a single database, but gives you the option of pulling from multiple databases, as I've explained here, and modeling the data and then displaying it. So that's sort of a quick overview of how to get started with a component. I realize there's so much more to say, but it's very difficult to cover all of that, and so hopefully as we go along, whatever questions still remain will be answered. We will be starting at fields, so it seems sort of turned around, right? You might feel we must start at the component and then build the views and then build the fields, and you possibly right. And you can do that. I mean, you can, after having created the component, you can click here on admin views, which is the first things you need to create is the admin views, and click new and create an admin view. But again, even there, you would, just like with the component, only be able to set the bare bone information and not all the needed more nitty-gritty complex information, if I could say it so. And that's why I usually, sorry, wrong file. I usually start at the bottom bottom and work my way up. I usually start with creating all the fields I know I'm going to need. So I would basically collapse this, take these away like that. And just go create all these fields. And when I see there are duplicate fields, I would remove them because I know how to use them. So I'll just create fields that I know are unique. And then when I come to certain fields like these, these are custom fields. These I won't create initially. So these are the custom fields. If I look through it quickly, these are custom fields, and I won't create them initially. So I would also separate the custom fields. Now, how do I know it's a custom field? Well, because the preacher is, I wanted to pull IDs from the preacher view. So if we go back here, how do I click there? Here we go. Okay, so let's mark those custom fields again. I would like to have this field basically link to that name, right? A list of these names. And the same for the series. I would like it to link to that value. And in Joomla, you can create what is known as custom fields, and Component Builder makes provision for you to do so. But this is what I would call an advanced field. And so we will only look at advanced custom fields after we've looked at creating normal fields and creating actually backend views, because only then will you understand the implementation of this custom field, since it will be linking to a backend views value. You see, it's not just linking to a bunch of values, it's linking directly to this backend views value called name. And so we can't really create it until we really know how this is going to look, and that's why we will be only looking at that after. And I possibly will explain this again, but just that you know where we're going. Building a component needs these kind of things to be thought through and sort of mapped out. Some of us might not need to write it down, some of us do, depends on who you are. To me, that doesn't really matter. Even if you have these things in your head, as long as you come to Component Builder knowing exactly, well, sorry, that's the wrong word, at least knowing partially what you want to achieve and what you want to build. Now that means you can do a lot of paper planning and do a lot of sort of structuring of your component long before actually getting to Component Builder itself. And that's really what this short tutorial was trying to illustrate, that if you haven't done this, you might get lost and not know where you're heading when you start mapping the fields and the views and the things in Component Builder itself. Well, thank you for watching. Next up, we'll start looking at field types, and then we'll look at using field types to create fields. And so slowly we'll be progressing to eventually ending up with having this component fully functional and working. And we will be illustrating all of these fields as they relate to this backend views that are linked to database tables. And hopefully that will give you a good enough insight and understanding of how all this should be done. Okay. Thank you for watching.